Hi, Greg. My name's Abraham Morales. I'm the game director of B.ARK. Excited to talk a little bit about the game coming out for Nintendo Switch and PC via Steam, July 29th.
I'm really curious about the inspirations behind this game. I kind of feel like it would be what Star Fox would be if it was a shmup, was a side-scrolling shmup. Was that part of your inspiration in making this game?
We're definitely fans of Star Fox, but we wanted to create an experience mostly based on us growing up with games in the 90s. I played a lot of Gradius 3 on my Super Nintendo. I grew up also playing Life Force on NES. It was probably one of the first games that I've ever played. And we wanted to create experience that you can bring in your friends, you can bring in your family. So consider it like a multiplayer Gradius. But at the same time, to that nostalgia feel, we wanted that strong Saturday morning cartoon vibe. So there's a lot of mechanics from traditional shmups, from games that had recently come out, from us growing up playing these games with friends and family. So yeah, it's a love letter.
Can you talk about some of the colorful characters? You mentioned the Saturday morning cartoon aspect. You have like a derpy bear, kind of like a mischievous looking cat, and a fox too, I believe, right? Or it's not a fox. Can you talk about some of the inspirations like behind those designs? I mean, are these animals that you guys have at home? Are these pets? Are these just like animals that you just liked to use because you liked the way they looked? Or elaborate on that a little bit.
So honestly, we wanted an excuse to put pets and mechs and throw them into space to kill sea life that managed to escape into orbit and now are dominating the whole solar system. So this is really just a fun idea and also a spin around how do we make pets in space without being 100% too similar to Star Fox. We wanted to do our own thing and show a story in which the team is basically on their way to rescue the Earth and their humans.
So can you talk about what are the challenges of bringing the co-op aspect of the game? I mean, you can have up to 4 players on the screen at once. I'm assuming, is that different on the Switch? Are you limited to, or is it still 4 players on the screen? Like how's the multiplayer aspect? Talk about the co-op aspect of your game.
So game can be enjoyed solo and multiplayer. And yes, if you're playing on a Nintendo Switch, you can just give everyone a Joy-Con in their hands, a Nintendo Switch Pro controller. You can bring up the experience with you and just use a couple of Joy-Cons on your Switch. So there's many ways that you can enjoy B.ARK on Switch. And yes, it's 4 people simultaneously playing. It gets super chaotic with a lot of bullets in your favor. So it's bullet hell on the player's favor. The bosses do get kind of tough as you progress through the game. And on Steam, you can play using remote play or things like Parsec, or you can just bring your laptop to a friend's house and just plug a bunch of USB controllers into it. You'll be able to enjoy it, or through Bluetooth. So yeah, I mean, the great thing about the cooperative mechanics is that if you're not familiar with shmups, if you've always felt overwhelmed of some of the games that have recently come out, just sometimes that are very difficult right from the get-go, and myself, when I wanted to bring in friends to play these sort of games, they always go like, nah, I'm not really good at them. But we added mechanics in which you can carry some of your friends. You can, if their ship gets destroyed, you can pick them up, you can keep them in the action. They can still provide fire support while they respawn, and then immediately they come back fully powered up. So it's just another way for you to enjoy these types of games with people that are not familiar with the genre, or even if you try the more difficult levels and you're a shmup veteran, then you'll definitely find challenge even in the cooperative mode.
Was it hard? Was it difficult having 4-player co-op simultaneously on the Switch in particular? Because I know that platform is already super stretched to its limits based on the limited power you have. Was that a challenge to do that?
Yeah, it is a challenge, and we ran a lot of play tests even during the pandemic. It was kind of tough to really review how the multiplayer was going to feel with that amount of bullets and visual effects on screen. So there were definitely technical challenges that we needed to overcome. There are still things there that we want to look out for. Like part of us doing a lot of play tests was just to make sure that we nailed the most fluid experience on all platforms. And we also took a little bit more time to make sure that we pushed to get it right.
And then obviously talk about like each one of the animals, Felicity, Lucio, Barker, and I forget the rabbit's name. Is it Marv?
It's Marv.
It's Marv, yeah. Like they all have different spaceships and different, character models, but do they play differently? Do they have like unique basic attack or special attack?
Yeah. I mean, we wanted to create sort of like an RPG classes kind of feel for each of the character ship. They all move the same, they dodge the same, they have that dodge mechanic. But where they differ is that they have their own weapon types and they have their own unique supers. So their weapon types are inspired on mechanics of other shmup games that we grew up with. Like, for example, Marv has homing bullets, very similar to the ones you would find on the Super Nintendo Super Earth Defense Force game. And Barker has fish buddies. He just makes friends along the way, so they tag behind him, similar to how Options in Gradius 3 tag behind a Vic Viper. So things like that are part of how each character ship is different, but they also have their own super abilities. So this is something that we wanted to bring into B.ARK. Like, you can activate your super and you can unleash just a devastating attack to bosses, or depending on the character you're playing with, you have support abilities that allow you to create a shield to block from incoming fire, or even slow down time that just allows you to kind of sneak past those very intensive bullet patterns. And plus the supers, you can also fuse your supers. So you can strategize, hey, everybody, activate your supers at the same time. And then you hover over each other's ships, and that basically stacks each person super on top of each other. And you could just unleash a barrage of crazy combinations and just melt bosses. We want you to beat the level. We want you to have fun and just melt the thing that's in front of you.
I'm getting a very Power Rangers vibe from that. Did they do like ridiculous, huge, yeah, all right, and then like, you know?
Definitely wanted to really bring those sort of effects and visual cut-ins. Very early on in development, we had to zoom in and you can see the character animation kind of flip around. But people were just not liking that because it kind of halted some of the gameplay experience, especially in moments that were very bullet intensive. So we kind of held back a little bit on that. But they do their animation, and then suddenly, boom, you see a big bubble come up, and then everybody fuses, and just a lot of bullets coming out on screen. Suddenly, you go like, "What is happening?" And you just see everything just melt in front of you. So that's what you get instead.
You know, as the game's director, it's interesting to see how game design, especially SMUPs, particularly in the 90s, like how they were designed to really eat your quarters. Like you were, like if you were good enough, you could get through the game. But like honestly, I'm going to have is like 10 or 11 or 12. I wasn't really good at arcade games. You know, I just, you know, one hit and you're dead, and you have to put another quarter to get, you know, I think 2 lives or 3 lives standard, 3 hits and you're on another quarter. Is it hard developing a shmup? Because so many of those games were designed differently with arcades, particularly in mind, and they weren't designed to really be accessible. Really, like they were designed for a really high skill point and to eat kids' quarters.
Yes. Yeah, for example, I grew up playing Gradius 3 on Super Nintendo, and that's a port. That's an arcade port. And the difficulty is still the same. It still feels tough as nails. Some of the NES games were a little bit easier. But really, when we're bringing in these sort of games and we're trying to revive a genre, we don't want you to feel like overwhelmed that you only get 3 lives and you're done and you have to start from the get-go. Like, we wanted to tell a story with these characters. We wanted to get them from point A to point B and just let you enjoy the experience with your friends and your family. So why would we want to eat your quarters? So we designed the experience based on just making sure that you had fun playing that story.
What does B.ARK stand for in your world?
It's Bio Interstellar Arc. So in the game, yeah, I mean, sure, we're forcing it.
It's a stretch, but you know what? This is how it works.
Yeah. It's related to the story. So there's an army that came from the oceans that we call the Dark Tide, and the Bio Interstellar Arc was a project from humans that they were gonna go into another solar system and create a new colony there. But the problem is that the Dark Tide actually started invading the whole planet. So the Bio Interstellar Arc then turned into humanity's last hope for salvation, and that's where the story begins.
And speaking of the game's development, did the COVID or pandemic affect the game's progress at all, or were you guys already fully remote at the time?
Nah, it did impact us in workflow. We started full production back in March 2020, 2 weeks before the pandemic. When I joined TikTok Games, the team already had a working prototype, and the main mechanics were there. The multiplayer aspects, the competitive, cooperative mechanics were designed in a prototype. We loved it, and we decided to kick off full production on the game. 2 weeks we went into quarantine, and then everything just all right, we got to rethink how we're going to be doing the plan. We're going to rethink how we're going to be doing play testing. And once development came further along, like, okay, how are we going to sit down in the same room while keeping the team safe, and their safety was our top priority. How are we rotating dev kits? How are we testing on Switch multiplayer during important milestones? So yeah, there were definitely workarounds, but there was a lot of driving. There was a lot of people bringing in from the team, just delivering on a door-to-door basis disinfected dev kits. So yeah, it was interesting.
You're on PC and coming to Switch. Were there any particular challenges when porting to the Switch? Because I know sometimes the dock mode, handheld mode, especially in a shmup where there's a lot of things on screen, you have to usually tweak some interface stuff on that end.
Yeah, so we actually started multi-platform right from the get-go. We didn't know we were going to come out on Steam. We made that decision a little bit late last year, but we mostly began this development just as a PC game. There's some considerations in the code libraries that allow us to just adapt inputs to Switch peripherals. So we kind of got a little bit of a head start on that. But then once we started testing, we got to make sure that we deal with all those different use cases of tablet mode, tabletop mode, handheld mode, or Joy-Con separate, or HTV mode. Things like that were part of the testing that we did right after we hit our first milestone.
Was there anything particularly difficult on your end as the games director that you had to problem solve or fix for whether the PC version or the Switch version? Any fun stories come to mind you can talk about the development?
Yeah, too many for sure. Input binding was part of it. I know we wanted, because we talked about accessibility, and when we say that B.ARK, we wanted to make it accessible, we wanted to make sure that it was an easy experience for people to pick up. But once we opened it up to PC and we were like, hey, with PC, we want to put some input binding for custom controllers and really make it accessible for people that can't use controllers to play. Can people enjoy this experience with their own custom controllers? So that's why we figured that we needed important features like input binding. And yeah, there's a lot of stories behind figuring out just what kind of keys if you press the Windows key, can you bind something in the game with the Windows key? What kind of effect does that do? So the play testing for input binding is no joke. It's no joke. But yeah, there's so many stories from sound effects, like the noise that the first boss does. It's actually our art director, Mark Gomez, making a narwhal noise. So that's funny. But I have so many of those.
So this Gladius meets Star Fox meets Saturday morning cartoon. When can people get their hands on this? Where can they go to support it? Do you have a website, Discord, Twitter, all that good stuff?
Yeah, sure. So you can go to barkthegame.com. That's where you're going to find the links for Nintendo eShop and for Steam. We're coming out on July 29th. So if you can wishlist right now, that would be fantastic. But you can buy just in a couple of weeks.